Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Working Dead, keeping your team alive and engaged. We are going to get started in about 1 minute. Just give everybody else a chance to log on. A couple of housekeeping items. Over on the right-hand side of the screen, we have chat and questions. So if you'd like to chat with me during this, ask any questions, go ahead and put those either in the chat or questions box. At the end of the webinar, we'll have time for questions as well. And we also have a poll section. I'm not doing polls today just because this is going to be a little bit shorter than some of our other webinars. We'll be going for about 35 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions at the end. So it looks like it is 12:30 now, and we can go ahead and get started. Again, welcome to The Working Dead, keeping your team alive and engaged. My name is Wendy Schaefer, and I'm your presenter today. I'm the operations and product manager here at the Omnia Group. I've been with Omnia for 21 years, and I'm just really passionate about using behavioral science as a tool for helping business leaders effectively select, manage, motivate their teams. So let's talk about ways that we can use personality styles to keep our team engaged. And while I don't think behavioral data is everything you need to be successful, it's truly an amazing tool for providing insight and information, and thereby giving you an advantage as you maneuver around the ups and downs of managing your team. I'm a firm believer that we should use any tool at our disposal to be the best leaders that we can be. So I titled this webinar The Working Dead because I'm a huge Walking Dead fan, right? And so a couple of years ago, I decided to write an article thinking I was being so clever with the word pun and trying to think about ways to tie that into disengagement in the workplace. But then, of course, I did a quick Google search and realized that about 1 million other people had that exact same idea. So what's unique, though, about this is that we're going to talk a lot about how behavioral data will give you an advantage in engaging your team. So that's what we do here at Omnia. I also had this vision of using sort of zombie-esque images, but quickly realized that that might not appeal to everyone. So no worries, we're not going to have anything gory in this webinar. Engagement is so important, and it's something that everyone needs. My son is currently on spring break, so he's with his grandparents, right? They have a pool, they have a pool table, a dog, you name it, a bunch of stuff that he doesn't have at home. So on day 2 of spring break, he announces to my mom that he's not going back to school because, I quote, "this is the life." He's in 3rd grade, y'all, so he's disengaged with school already. And while none of us are too keen to go back to work after a great vacation, we want to provide an environment for our staff that energizes them and gets them excited to leave the pool and the dog and come to work. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Engagement, right? So according to the newest Gallup findings, and that was dated August 2018, of the nearly 31,000 US workers polled, 34,000 are actively engaged. And what that means is that they're involved in, they're enthusiastic about, and they're committed to their work and to their workplace. 13%, though, are actively disengaged. And this means that they either have or they perceive a miserable work experience. So they've pretty much checked out. And then there's 53% that are not engaged. And what we like to call that is conditionally engaged, because there is still hope in this large segment, right? According to Gallup, this group is generally satisfied, but they're not really cognitively or emotionally committed to their work or their workplace. They often do the minimal to get by, and therefore they might jump ship rather quickly if a better opportunity comes along. So you can have some real A players in this group, but if something has them feeling only partially engaged in their work, you want to ask yourself if that's something that's within your control to change. So meaning, is your organization committed to focusing on employee engagement? Are you as a leader focusing on it? So if your answer is, well, not really, then we know we can make strides to move the people from this group to the actively engaged column. And we want to do that because, again, they still have passion and we don't want to let that fizzle out. It's really much more cost effective to move this group up than to let them slip into the actively disengaged group, or, God forbid, they'll leave the organization altogether and then we have to start all over, right? So we have to do the recruiting, the interviewing, the hiring, the training. And then if you still aren't focusing on engagement, all of that energy could be for nothing. So the good news, though, overall is that for the country, these numbers have been steadily improving since 2000. They've improved from the last time we ran this poll on an engagement survey. I think it was in 2016. We had reported a 17% active disengagement figure. So the trend is positive, but that trend is national. So we want to really focus, of course, on our own businesses and what is it like for our business. So does your team look like this? And we know it probably doesn't look like that literally, but this is what active disengagement looks like on the inside. So if you have a high percentage of actively disengaged people, you're definitely losing productivity. According to that same Gallup article, organizations that excel at engaging their employees achieve earnings per share growth that is more than 4 times that of their competitors. So 4 times. Comparing business units in the bottom quartile to those in the top quartile of engagement, those in the top have substantially better customer engagement. They have higher productivity. They have better retention. They have fewer accidents, and they have 21% higher profitability. And engaged workers also report better health outcomes. So we can see that the real upside of working on engagement, right? It's definitely not a buzzword or a fad. I know that's the first thing I thought when I heard that term 20 years ago. I'm like, well, that's just another word for motivating people, right? But it's not. It's real. It's here to stay, and it really can make a positive difference in your business. But it's up to you. It's up to leadership and as a manager, as a direct supervisor, to put energy into that engagement effort. So what can we do? So the first off, of course, is effective leadership. And the key to keeping your team lively and engaged and not walking around like a bunch of zombies is to start with the leader. You have the opportunity to inspire your team so that they feel connected to their job and to the workplace, right? So you can do things like acknowledge successes and failures. Keep people energized by recognizing the wins and by discussing the failures as a learning opportunity and not a criticism. So if everybody gets together and talks about a setback, then that's a way to grow from that setback. And it lets them know that if they make a mistake, it's not the end of the world and that we're going to make it better going forward versus an environment that really puts that down. You also want to make sure that your team has the technology, of course, that they need to be effective, as well as other job-related resources and incentives. So, for example, you might offer some time management programs, knowledge sharing, which we're going to talk more about in terms of collaboration and having your team work together to brainstorm ideas. Also, you can provide training resources and leadership opportunities. And what I mean by leadership opportunities is not that you're going to make everybody a manager in the business, but give them the opportunity maybe to train or mentor others. So increasing that responsibility. And the first thing that we need to do is to start by talking about the importance of creating the right environment. Environment is key. So as leaders, the first thing that we'll do is kind of focus on that. We want to create an environment that promotes rather than discourages engagement. So the first area to think about is communication. The backbone of any relationship, whether it's personal or professional, is communication. Communication is often where problems either start or where they spiral completely out of control, right? Miscommunication is the worst. So employees perform better when they receive constructive feedback from with their managers, that the expectations are clear, and that the managers are also honest about their expectations. So if you make feedback a pillar of your business, then your employees will definitely reciprocate. The next thing that you want to focus on with the environment is career pathing. Create the opportunity for people to fully develop their abilities and knowledge in their areas of interest. This is always at or near the top when people are polled on what they want from their employers, and it's career path development, personal and professional development. So one way you might do that is provide some cross-training opportunities so that your staff can learn all of the jobs in their department or work area. And that also increases your flexibility, and then it's increasing theirs as well. So it's critical for businesses to have regular career planning discussions with their employees. As a part of training and development, make sure employees are aware of the different types of career paths or job opportunities throughout the company. And really don't talk about a path if you know it's not an option for that individual. I can't tell you how many people I've actually interviewed here where the reason that they left their former job wasn't that they didn't like it, but that they were told things in the interview that never happened or that were never going to be a reality. So what you want to do is just, of course, be honest. It's a better way to keep people. Otherwise, you're already building that distrust, dissatisfaction, and you're losing credibility as an employer. So career pathing. And then the next thing is creating traditions. And this can be a fun thing because traditions are as important in companies as they are in our families, right? So a holiday tradition that you might have in the office can build morale. One of the things that we do here, because we are into behavioral science and personality, is that we would have a holiday party as kind of a pot lunch thing. And potluck, I couldn't say that quickly, where everybody brought a toy. It was sort of like a secret Santa. So whose name you pulled, you would try to buy a toy that matched that person's personality type. So that was a lot of fun. It sort of went in with what we did. And we did that for a long time, and then we sort of evolved that tradition, and now we are promoting a different charity. So, of course, we didn't keep the toys. We gave them to a children's charity. Also, it reminds me of that movie, Mr. Mom, which is really dating myself, but it was an advertising company that did like an office Olympics at the CEO's home. If anybody's seen that movie, it's hysterical. So they do a bunch of different little Olympic-y things. And what was funny about that movie is that one of the things that the employees knew is that they always had to let the CEO win at the end of it. So if you're creating a tradition, you definitely want to keep it credible. And then we're going to talk about collaboration as a way to create a really great, engaged, energized environment. So an environment that promotes collaboration is important. And what I mean by that is letting people exchange ideas or talk over a customer interaction either before or after it happens, or brainstorm a problem with each other. So some companies even have what they call collaboration corners, which is an area with maybe a couch or beanbag chairs where people can leave their office to work for a bit and interact with coworkers on work issues. I'm personally not a fan of like the open space concept, at least not across the board, because I don't think every job is conducive to that. Some require a lot of concentration and private space. But I do like the idea of that common area for collaboration. I think that's nice. But collaboration corners might not make sense for you. We don't have them here. It doesn't work with our physical space, but consider other ways to encourage interaction and exchange. I really think that an environment that supports collegial interaction creates momentum for ideas, for innovation, and for growth. And it keeps the energy up. And I really think energy is what creates an engaged workforce. It's one of the things that creates an engaged workforce. So for example, I sometimes even think that bad energy is better than no energy at all. And by no means am I promoting bad energy, but I have an example of working for a boss, this was years ago, who was very demanding and a little perhaps emotionally unstable. So what would happen is that because of these demands, there was high energy in the workplace for sure. Everybody knew what they had to do, and if you didn't do it, there was trouble. So I will say it kept you up, it kept you on your toes, but over time, it definitely burnt me out, and as it would any employee. But by another example, I'd worked for an office years ago, that didn't have any energy at all. It was just nobody really spoke to each other. They weren't talking about their interactions. And I have to say that was even worse. So what we want to do is neither of those things, of course. We want to create a high energy environment that promotes positive collaboration. And so if we encourage this open collaboration, we need to encourage it across the board. You don't want to undermine it by frowning or looking at your watch as you walk by people who are clearly talking about work. So if they're exchanging ideas and they're brainstorming, support it. Because if you don't support it, what you're saying and what you're doing are two different things. And then that's going to create distrust, and we'll go right back to the disengagement. Okay, so talking now about personality type, and we're going to get into that, but one size for engagement and motivation definitely doesn't fit all. That's the myth, is that we can do the same thing for everybody. And while we can do some things the same, I think we really do want to focus on the individual. So the fact is that different people are motivated by different things, right? So one thing I'm saying is that throwing out your conference table for a couch is not going to solve all your problems. So engagement requires constant focus. It's important to understand the individuals on your team. Like we said, no two people are exactly alike. We're motivated and inspired by different things. So that's where the behavioral science piece is really going to be a valuable tool to complement your existing engagement practices. And really, it will help you with interacting with people for any reason. Because essentially, what behavioral science is a cheat sheet toward understanding your employees at the individual level. And that's what we specialize in here. So you can use that data to customize your engagement activities to meet the needs of each member of your team. So, how do we do that? What Omnia does in our methodology here is that it's based off of the work of Carl Jung and well behavior. And many highly regarded tools follow this same model. So we measure 4 key aspects of personality. And the first is assertiveness. The second is sociability, which we'll also call communication. And then we measure pace and we measure structure. So the first thing is assertiveness. There are 2 sides to that coin. You've got your assertive personalities and your non-assertive personalities. So the assertive individuals, they're proactive, they're assertive, they ask for the business if they're in a sales position, if they're in a management position, they're comfortable dealing with confrontation or conflict, but their challenges might be compromising, putting people first, and setting realistic goals. And their motivators are typically individual goals and the opportunity to win. So, for example, if you have salespeople, individual goals would be like the commission paycheck, right? They're motivated to take risks to earn a greater reward. So, and winning is a way you can incent them through sales contests, or, they're in a contest with other members of the team. So they have that chance to be first, they can win the prize, and they get those bragging rights. And that's really what will motivate your highly assertive individuals. On the other side of the spectrum, then you have the supportive individuals. So the assertiveness tends to be low. They're more cautious, team oriented. They partner very well with their coworkers in that sort of helpful fashion, right? So some of the challenges that they might have would be taking initiative in a new setting, exerting authority, dealing with confrontation or conflict, especially on a regular basis, and negotiating. So it tends to be a weak area for if they're in sales, for example. But their motivators are team goals and collaboration. So for team goals, you might have, for example, a service department that is incented as a whole if the team achieves a certain revenue number in suggestive sales, for example. And that's not to say that you wouldn't also individually incent a supportive personality, but know that something like commission, where they're putting their stable paycheck on the line, would not be a motivator for your supportive personality type. It's going to have the exact opposite effect. So give your supportive personality types the opportunity also to collaborate towards a shared goal or a purpose where they're working with rather than against other people. The other area that we measure is communication, and we have our expressives, and those are the extroverted, people oriented individuals on your team who are comfortable building rapport, creating excitement for the products and services that they're representing. They're good at building relationships. Some challenge areas that they might have would be active listening and really focusing on the facts and specifics when they're in a conversation, and sometimes objectivity because they can be very intuitive decision makers. Some great motivators for them are building relationships, working with and through other people, and recognition. And they especially like public recognition. So if you're having like an award or calling somebody out at a meeting, the expressives are really going to appreciate that type of recognition. The other side are the analytical people. So those are the individuals who tend to feel energized working with data and information. So kind of those head down type of tasks. They're great at asking questions. They tend to be very objective problem solvers. And they, for example, if they're in a sales position, they can strategically position the products and services that they're representing. Their challenge areas, might be communicating with diplomacy. They tend to be very factual, so they might not always think about how they're saying something. Also, networking and public presentation skills could be some challenge areas. So this, just understanding challenge areas of each individual can help you develop a coaching path and a development path that also promotes engagement. And then some motivators that the analytics are going to have would be job specific feedback. They like to be the subject matter expert, so product knowledge. Oftentimes, depending on how assertive they are, they might not really appreciate the public recognition as much as the expressives do, but they would really like that sort of private, personal recognition, maybe through a note or something like that. So it's just a little bit different. And again, it's all how it plays together. So you can have a very assertive, analytical person who might still appreciate that public recognition. The other thing that we measure is pace. So there are two sides to that as well. You've got your fast-paced, multitasking people. They have a strong sense of urgency. They're comfortable with the unexpected. They can deal with interruptions. They're good at change management. Their challenge areas might be getting overextended, organization, following through on tasks that they find kind of repetitive or boring, and long-term goal setting. So some motivators could be jobs that have rapid accomplishment and when you set short-term goals, and also maybe breaking up a long-term project into milestones so that they can sort of hit that milestone and feel a sense of accomplishment when they hit it. The other side of PACE are your systematic people. So they're patient, they like to finish one thing at a time, they're very good at following through on every task, and they tend to be organized and methodical. Some challenge areas, though, might be rushing or dealing with the unexpected, which is something that the faster paced people are very good at, and managing multiple tasks at once, at least when if it all hits them at one time and they haven't had an opportunity to prioritize and to kind of plan it out, that's when that can be a challenge. Their motivators, though, would be just giving them ample time to plan. So give them lots of notice of deadlines and timetables when you can. And of course, it's not always possible. And if it's not, then maybe some coaching on how to manage the unexpected to, again, keep that engagement high. And also, they tend to like a more predictable routine. So when you can provide that, or if there's ways that you can make the position feel a little bit more stable in terms of what they're doing each day, that's a great motivator. So the last thing that we measure is what I call need for structure. So on the one hand, you've got the autonomous group. They are independent, big picture thinkers. They like to do things outside of the box, be a little bit more innovative, and they tend to be very thick-skinned. So those are strengths. This tends to be a great trait for sales positions because of the rejection involved, of course. And then the challenge areas might be really detailed work, where they're always having to be responsible for, dotting every I, crossing every T, so to speak. And then also micromanagement. They like to have some opportunity to self-manage and to get from point A to point B their own way. And then so following guidelines can sometimes be a challenge area, sort of depending on how tight and strict those guidelines are. And then their motivators are, latitude to reach goals their own way. As long as they get to the end goal, they like to have the freedom to do it in their own method. And then empowerment, making sure that they're empowered to make decisions and have control over their work product. Those are great motivators. The other side are your by the book people, right? So they're very procedurally oriented. They follow guidelines. They like the rules. That gives a sense of security. Some challenge areas for that individual might be dealing with ambiguity. So having to make a decision when there isn't a procedure to rely on. Delegating to other people can be a challenge area because they like to have that control in order to do it right. And then rejection can be a challenge area. So the structured by the book people can struggle a little bit, for example, in a sales position. Motivators for your by the book workers would be learning resources, having written guidelines and clear expectations. Of course, everybody needs clear expectations, but making sure that they understand what that is. So if they have any questions, they like to be able to have somebody to go to get the answers. So really with by the book people is just that opportunity to ask questions, get specific instructions, and know where they need to go when they don't have the information. So I sort of really ran by the personality stuff very quickly. There's a lot more, of course, that we can tell about an individual, and then we look at how these traits interact with each other, which is a big factor as well. So let's do another fact and myth for engagement, right? I, as a manager, am solely responsible for motivating my team. That's a myth. The fact is that employees really do have to help with the process, right? So you don't have to beat yourself up if some people do not ever seem happy or engaged despite your best efforts, right? Employees have to be willing participants in the process, and there's always going to be, that one person that's going to be negative through and through, and they've decided to be miserable and nothing's going to change, right? But that's a topic for another webinar. Although I do suggest sitting down one-on-one with that person and asking them what the perfect job looks like to them and see if there's a way to meet them in the middle. And you might be surprised at what it takes might be really something very small. But if you're dealing with a person who won't budge from the negative, then don't let that stop or discourage you. It's still worth the effort. If not for that person, then remember for that 53% that you're trying to inspire towards maximum productivity. What you are responsible for, though, of course, like we said, is creating the environment where motivation can flourish. And we talked a lot about that already. Avoid getting too caught up in the day-to-day grind and the short-term productivity that you put off engagement and motivation for another time, because then it just won't ever come, right? Work culture matters, and it's proven time and again. So really focus on that. Create that positive environment for your employee, make them happier, and your company will do better as a result. So another fact myth thing is everyone is motivated by money, and then some people are motivated by money. And really what I'm trying to say here is that money is definitely a motivator. It's also a need, though. So we need it to live. But it's not the only motivator, and sometimes it's not the primary motivator for everyone as long as their basic needs are being met. So it's sort of similar to that Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory, where people have certain needs that have to be met before they're motivated by the next thing up on the pyramid. So the first are physiological and safety needs, and that's where money plays a big factor. So, being able to buy food, drink, shelter, security. So then comes your social needs and your esteem needs. Um, So thinking about that, you want to realize that not everybody's going to be motivated, for example, by a movie gift certificate if they're really not making enough to pay rent and utilities. So not everything is going to work at the same time for everybody. And we really use that's where behavioral science can come into play to find out what those intrinsic motivators are for each individual. And then also some of the realistic motivators, which would come down to that one-on-one conversation with each employee. So non-money motivators, and I know we are getting close to our time, so we're going to talk about some of the things that we can do to motivate our staff that are not expensive. And of course, that's assuming that we're paying the competitive wage and that we're incenting our salespeople with commission if they're closing business, things like that. So those are the money motivators. But some non-money motivators might be volunteer days, which is giving an employee the opportunity to attend a community service function, for example, during business hours, or acknowledging progress through maybe some recognition awards, and just giving them too a list of options. What are some of the things that would motivate you? It's always a great idea to ask your team what they want. You can use surveys for that. You can use one-on-one conversation. You could do group brainstorming sessions to get that information, because it's always good just to see what it is they want. So here's another fact and myth. The myth is that bad news is bad. And the fact is that bad news only has a negative effect if you're not upfront and honest. And of course, there's some bad news that is just always going to be bad. I think of Dwight Schrute. He's yelling false. Bad news is always bad, or it wouldn't be called bad. But how do you sort of deal with the negative impact of bad news? And that's what can set you apart as an employer. So if we took a look at, say, the worst case example of having to lay somebody off, maybe a way to turn that negative a little bit more positive would be to say offering a career placement service to help them, so that you're at least not leaving it with a completely bitter tone. So there are always things that we can do to turn something bad and at least make it as good as possible. And again, we can't always make it great, but we can do things that will set us apart as an employer that cares and that will engage people, and that will try to be that employer of choice and be branded as an employer of choice. So here we have just some ideas. Like we said, ask your team what it is that they want. You can set up lunches, breakfasts, or forums where your team can help you brainstorm through some of things that they want to be engaged, but also use those forums to talk about ways to make the business better or ways to secure a new client, literally talking to your group. Again, it's all about that collaboration and that feedback. So working together, you might say, and that's what this means by you write the headline, is here's the goal that we're going to be talking about today. And then you let them help you fill that in and how you're going to achieve it. So I think the most important thing to do when you're engaging your people and focusing on engagement as a constant part of your leadership activities is to be consistent. If you start doing something, keep doing it. And if you can't, be sure to give people a heads up so they realize that it's just a temporary blip. Get to know them as individuals. You can create an engagement survey, like we briefly mentioned, where employees can rank what's important to them, how satisfied they are in each area. And then you can maybe come up with some low cost resources to meet those needs. Also, customize your approach using the behavioral science that we've been talking about. I think there's a perception that behavioral assessments are used just in the selection process, and then they get put in a drawer and we forget about them. But really, they're so much more valuable than that, because you can use it as a tool throughout an employee's tenure. I know we are short on time, so I am going to skip over to some ideas here. One of the things that's very important with engaging your team is accountability. I think that people are much more motivated to achieve, and they're much more energized when they have some accountability, right? So you want to set specific goals for each individual on your team. And we say set those SMART goals. And what that means is that they are specific, they're measurable, they're achievable, they're relevant, and they're time bound. So making sure that those goals hit all those things so that people are accountable. And accountability definitely does not have to be a dirty word, right? Especially when it comes to coaching. In fact, there's just so many numerous positive benefits that happen when we embrace accountability, like motivation, conversations, obstacles that we need to work around. All of that comes from being accountable. And I know I personally feel a lot more energy when I'm accountable for something versus somebody saying, well, here, take this. And, whenever you can get to it, it's not a priority. That doesn't leave me inspired, right? So, one example, and I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Orange Theory fitness model. I think it's a national fitness chain, but that's where I go. And the premise there is that you have to sign up for the class that you're taking in order to A, secure the spot, and B, be accountable to going. Because if you don't go, you actually lose the class. So, for example, I have an 8 class a month plan. So, if I sign up and I don't go, I'm automatically down to 7 classes. If you have the unlimited plan and you don't go, you actually have to pay for that class along with your monthly membership. So I don't know, that accountability just works for me. I once had a gym membership. I had it for a year. I didn't go 365 days in a row, and I still had that gym membership. I still paid for it every month because nobody cared if I went or didn't. Now, do you know I've been with Orange Theory for 2.5 years, and I've literally missed 1 class. And that's just because I forgot that I had signed up for it. So for some reason that you're going to use it or lose it just works. So I think that's the same at work. If you're accountable to a goal, you're going to be motivated to achieve it. And then, of course, recognize productivity. So we're going to sum up with some ideas for you on things that can help sort of motivate and engage and inspire your team. Of course, think outside the box. There's lots of resources out there on the internet where you can find things to do. But one of the things that we recently started doing here, and this was just as I was researching some stuff online, but we have like a joke board. So every couple of days, people will go in there and put up a joke, and we'll make sure we're keeping them fresh and, of course, not inappropriate. But when you're in the kitchen and it's up there and you've got something in the microwave, it's just a fun little thing that changes, and we're all participating in that. You can also do like an electronic buzzboard or a bulletin board in a break area that might just keep people up to date on what's going on in the office, right? Maybe the month after, you can say, well, here's what business we closed, here's what traveling we did, here are some accomplishments that we had, and you can put that up on the buzzboard, maybe along with birthdays, anniversaries, different recognition. You can have people put up kudos for other employees, like somebody helped somebody else out, and so they put a little note for everybody to see. I think for the analytics on your team, personal notes of congratulation are a really great way to motivate. Maybe you might do an all company shout out though for an extrovert where it's like public recognition. You can also do customized achievement certificates. They can be personal written recognitions like that, or you can use electronic means to highlight achievement. Maybe you've got an intranet or an internal praise blog that you can create for your employees. From a public recognition standpoint, you could always start off every meeting by recognizing an employee achievement, or you could host maybe an awards ceremony. And this makes me think of The Office where they did the Dundee Awards. And of course, I would suggest that they would be far more appropriate than the Dundee Awards, but you kind of get the idea. It's just ways that we can recognize and motivate people. So I think it was Mark Twain who said, I can live for 2 weeks on a good compliment. So just making sure that you're complimenting people in the way that they like to be recognized. And by doing that, just use your tools. We've got behavioral assessments, checking in with your new employees, figuring out what type of recognition you want to provide either as a group or for individuals, being self-aware of your own leadership style, because sometimes you'll have to work against your natural grain to provide recognition to someone else. So if you're an analytic, for example, that isn't keen on the public recognition, but you've got some extroverts on your team, you might need to step outside of your comfort zone to recognize them publicly. Also, you can use surveys to figure out what it is that employees would like. You can put together some employee recognition teams where maybe they're incented to figure out ways to motivate throughout the company. So you've got like a little, I don't want to call it like the birthday celebration committee, because again, I'm stuck in that show, The Office, but a committee of employees who works together to recognize other employees. And then, of course, constant, consistent review of your programs, because they will get stale over time and we got to keep them up to date and keep them interesting. Okay, so I know we are at the end of our time, so I'm going to open it up for questions. If anybody has any questions, I would love to hear from you. And also, Paula Marie is going to be putting this presentation up so that you can download it. She'll keep it up for a couple of minutes after the presentation is over so that you can download it. All you have to do is click on the link once she has it up there in the chat box. You'll be able to just click on that link and then download it. And I also have a nice little handout for everybody that talks about different motivators and ways to recognize people. So you've got the presentation that you can download, and then you've also got the handout on some sort of low cost recognition tools, for lack of a better word. So I hope you enjoyed this today, the Working Dead, keeping your team alive and engaged. And again, if you have any questions, I'm going to be here for a few minutes. Please feel free to use the chat box. I hope that you have walked away with some great tips for motivating your team. And thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Have a great afternoon.